Enel is one of the most highly impactful One Piece characters that we know next to nothing about. Or do we? Because there's a lot of circumstantial evidence around Enel. I think there's a strong possibility that he is a Lunarian. Now, I know that in the face of it, that doesn't seem to be much evidence for this, but there is actually more than you would think. But to fully understand this, and to fully understand why it's important, we have to go back and understand King. The man we fought was the last Lunarian. Now, Lunarians are a fairly recent species to us as viewers, with the only one that we are aware of being King. Kaido, second in command, and the first Lunarian that we ever saw. It is between his backstory and a few comments from Marco that we have started to get an idea of the history of Lunarians. The first time that this subject was even raised was by Marco, as a matter of fact, as we see the idea that he says he knows what King is, and we get a flashback. The flashback details Marco and Whitebeard drinking together, and Whitebeard seems to let slip that there was once a race of people called gods that once lived atop the Red Line. Marco says that the celestial dragons aren't gods, and Whitebeard agrees, stating that these things were forced out by the celestial dragons. We don't get more information on this until Zoro fights with King, where we get our first actual look at him. We also learn from some of the beast pirates that the world government offers a massive reward just for information about Lunarians and where they are. This is where we get some explanation on how the world government hunted down and killed the Lunarians or experimented on them, attempting to do the same thing to King before he was freed by Kaido. While there is no direct explanation for the experimentation here, it is made quite clear during the battle that Lunarians have incredible physical strength, endurance, and the ability to fly. Their fire aids their strength and endurance further, giving them an almost invincible defense while it's active. It can also then be used as a massive offensive weapon that can be used to obliterate whole sections of an island. Of course, when in offense, Lunarians lose their defense, so they have to be careful. We see many of these traits being used in the Seraphim to make stronger weapons, a fact that King would probably be unaware of and would probably be very angered by. Even with all of these strengths, the Lunarians still lost to the world government, and now they are on the brink of extinction. There is some chance that some might be hiding in the One Piece world somewhere in different areas, but that's really a different theory altogether, and we'll come back to that at a different time, leaving us with only King as their confirmed member. And since we are talking about King, I'm sure many of you are going to point out that there are many differences between him and Enel. There are some of these, such as the wings and the fire, that I'm going to explain later on, but there is another factor that a lot of people are going to bring up, and that is that King seems to have a much darker complexion than Enel does. But the other thing to keep in mind is that King is actually the only Lunarian we've ever seen. The Seraphim are his direct clones. So we don't know if all the Lunarians actually look like him, or, also more likely, that Enel's backstory is also going to explain this particular difference. Specifically when, where, and how he was born. But if that question is, who really is Enel? So who is Enel? The Kami of Skypiea, and according to this theory at least, the first Lunarian that we ever met in One Piece. Enel's first introduction in the series actually happens off screen, as a god is mentioned a couple times as the Mary is making its way up towards Skypiea, and then of course the scene where there's a person being hunted on Varf and he's obliterated by a giant column of lightning. This would actually continue for some time in the Sky Island arc, where we hear mentions of Enel or bolts of lightning are seen from the sky, but the man himself remains unseen for a significant duration. That is until the beginning of Heaven's Game, and Enel's tried to determine who to bring with him to Endless Varf. He's introduced as the person that the priests serve and as the big bad for the whole arc. Now, his whole goal throughout Skypiea is to select those that he deems worthy of going to the Endless Varf, or the moon as everyone else calls it. Now, he arranges this massive battle between his army, the Shandorians, and the Strawhats and their allies. He also plans to blow up Skypiea and its residents because they are entirely unworthy to exist in the sky as he sees it. He also happens to develop a bit of an obsession with the Bell of Shandora, viewing it as his ultimate trophy he needs to collect before he leaves. Throughout the whole arc, we see that Enel is arguably one of the most dangerous characters that we have ever seen in One Piece, not only in the pre-time skip era, but also, to be honest, even into the post-Wano chapters. Enel has a Logia-type devil fruit called the Goro Goro no Mi, or Thunder fruit. The fruit turns the recipient into living lightning and electricity, letting them generate, control, and manipulate it as they see fit. Even in its base form, this is one of the most dangerous fruits, as the user is not only immune to standard physical attacks, but can now move around at the speed of lightning, and unless you had extreme armament hockey or are made of rubber, there is no real defense against this fruit. Enel takes it so much further though, as he is able to shape his lightning into various forms, such as animals and weapons. He can also use its surrounding effects, such as superheating the air to create an explosion of thunder, heating up materials like gold and reshape them, and even restarting his own heart. He can even combine his electricity with his observation hockey, as he calls it mantra, to make a constant radar that covers the whole of Skypiea. With it, he can see and hear almost anything on the island at any given time. It even seems to see to function almost like clairvoyant, affecting multiple areas at the same time. Even beyond his own abilities, Enel figured out how to combine his fruit with technology to create a flying ship that he could control just by himself. The ship is the Arc Maxim, and not only could he control it, he was the primary power source. He manages to take the concept even further by using the batteries on the Arc Maxim to store electricity for him to further use. This allows him to unleash larger and larger attacks like Raigo. But how did Enel gain all of these abilities, and where did he even come from? We know that Enel came from an island called Burka, which was another sky island. 8 years before Luffy arrived on Skypiea, Enel had consumed the Goro Goro no Mi and used its immense power to destroy the island, only taking the strongest fighters who became his most dedicated servants. He then set about taking over Skypiea, so he launched though since then Enel has been ruling the island. So with this being all that we know, this must leave the Fury dead, right? I mean, without more information, there's no way you could say that he is Lunarian, right? But there is one thing that we haven't mentioned yet, and that is the drum ring. The drum ring is one of the most prominent parts of Enel's overall design, and he uses part of his powers. But the ring conspicuously sits right where his wings should be as a Skypiean, or at least where they should be. It's also not explained why he has this in universe. After all, he doesn't seem like the kind of guy who would modify his body in such a way. Enel's unknown history. So in terms of Enel's history, we have to take into account what life would have been like for a Lunarian and their descendants. Most of them had been killed or hunted to extinction by the world government, and what few had survived had gone into hiding. Most seem to have formed tribes like the one that King was from, and we know they're not around anymore. However, it also makes sense that others may have gone back to the Sky Islands. After all, according to the history of One Piece, Lunarians might well have come from the moon and either found or made the Sky Islands first. Now, we know that Lunarians also carried with them the prophecy and the return of Joy Boy, but that was far, far into the future. Those that were left behind had to focus on surviving, and that seems to be the point that the two possible routes might have taken. One is that these Lunarians mixed with the standard Skypiean population, trying their best to remain unnoticed by travelers and living in dwindling existence. But then there's the second option. The second option is that the Lunarians chose to rule over the Skypieans as gods, and with their strength, there would have been little the Sky people could have done about it. It is within this state that they would have lived, and the Sky Islanders would either have had to waited for them to start dying out or had a large uprising. It's also possible that the island entered a survival of the fittest style warrior culture, which we have some hints for, in an attempt to create warriors strong enough to actually fight the world government and survive. This could have impacted Enel in different ways. Either way, the end is the same for the remaining Lunarians. Now, this is where Enel comes in fully, because I think that no matter which route the Lunarians took, Enel was born as one. He was raised with the stories of Joy Boy and the greatness that would re-enter the world, but then either to punish him for his heritage, remove someone they considered weak from the village, or to hide what he really was, his wings were removed against his will. This would have been scarring and emotionally traumatizing for Enel, and in the pits of his despair, with both his wings and the fire they granted him gone, he found something else, a weird-looking fruit. Upon eating this fruit, he gained the powers of lightning and became invincible. He would then graft the drums to his back and exact what he thought was a fair fate upon the island. No doubt he would have subjected them to a competition similar to that of his Heaven's Game from the Skypiea arc, forcing the citizens to fight and taking only the strongest with him. These survivors would have witnessed the incredible strength that he had and maybe actually started to view him as a god. But one person bared witness to all of this but didn't go with Enel, and the result would have left him quite mad. And of course, the person I'm talking about is the Mad Monk Urouge. I mean, this story would be pretty important, but already given the connection the Lunarians have with Joy Boy, it could also be very vital. There might very well be an important artifacts or knowledge passed down with Enel incorporated into his beliefs as a god, and somebody is going to have to know about that to pass it on. A good example of these could be like the Arc Maxim. The Arc Maxim is actually seen in the mural on Elbaf, specifically in a section between the first and second worlds. This more than likely means that the plans for such a ship and possibly other things could have been hidden on Burka or other Sky Islands, but since Enel isn't going to be sharing that anytime soon, I suspect that the Mad Monk Urouge might very well fill this role. The Mad Monk Urouge is the last member of the Worst Generation that we know nothing about, and we haven't even seen him since Kaido jumped off of Balloon Terminal. Though he was mentioned to have defeated the 4th Sweet General Charlotte Snack, but all of the Worst Generation have a somewhat present backstory and play some kind of important role in various arcs, whether it is Law and Kid being allies in Sabaody and Wano, or Scratchman and Hawkins being antagonists in the latter. But he is the one character who hasn't done anything like that, and to be honest, he is the one we know the least about overall. We know that he originally hails from a Sky Island and that he came down to the Blue Sea after something happened. We know that his crew is really more like a cult that seems to follow him around, and lastly, we know that he has eaten an as of yet unnamed Paramecia type fruit that turns physical damage into physical strength. He also has flame tattoos that are part of his design, and many have speculated that that could be very important, but for the time being, those just seem to be tattoos. Now, since Urouge came from a Sky Island and apparently left after something happened, it has been speculated for a long time that he was also a resident of Burka, particularly before it was destroyed, and its eradication maybe is what drove him mad. Now, I think this would be fine if it is all that was to be done with him, but this is Oda, and more than likely he's not going going to stop at that. So I think it seems perfectly likely that Urouge is actually going to have known Enel. Maybe they were friends, mentor and mentee, maybe Urouge was just part of Enel's army after the destruction of the island. But after said destruction, maybe he comes to realize that Enel isn't actually a god and he ends up leaving. This could actually work into the title of his crew, the Fallen Monk Pirates. No matter what the answer is, I get the feeling that the Mad Monk might be able to shed more light on both the past of the world and Enel himself. We have legit seen Oda do this a few times with other characters such as Crocodile and Arlong, using other characters to help flesh out and develop them with greater depth. And while this doesn't change our past perceptions of the characters by any means, Arlong was a monster before his backstory reveal and is still one after it, it can lend itself to new opportunities for them in paths of the future, similar to Crocodile. And in the future we are talking about, Enel has some very interesting possibilities. But what will Enel's role be in the final war? So we are in the final saga, and it seems highly likely that Enel will in fact return given his brief cover story in the One Piece cover serials. In that serial, we see that he has actually made it to the moon and finds both automatons and space pirates. He toasts the space pirates fairly easily and in the process revives the automaton. He is then taken to a secret ancient city located on the moon and learns that there is at least some true history to the world. And that was the last we've ever seen of him. Now, many have speculated that in the time skip period, Enel has been further building his army and honing his lightning ability. But the question is why? Why would Enel choose to return to the One Piece world after achieving his primary goal? More than likely, he will realize how valuable something on the One Piece world is and he will go for it. Whether this is an item or a person or even the world itself, and any of them could be the option he's fighting for, but who will he be fighting and where? I actually think there's 3 possibilities for Enel's potential future, so let's go over them. The first of these is that Enel will re-emerge in the One Piece world and then will team up with the world government. As the only gods in the world, while there is a small chance that this could actually happen, it seems highly unlikely to me, for a lot of reasons. One is that Enel is unlikely to view the world government as like legitimate. There's so many conflicts for him there, and how he would probably just view the celestial dragons as unworthy and, you know, really unworthy. Another is that it seems highly unlikely that Enel would be bumped down to like a second string, you know, villain. So either way, this seems highly unlikely. The second and more possible to occur is that Enel will return as a villain in a different arc before the final war. It's not often the characters get brought back as villains if they've already been one, but it does happen on occasion throughout the series. This would mean that Enel would be one of the last remaining obstacles for the Straw Hats to clear on their journey before the final war. Whether this is on another island before Laugh Tale or maybe even on it, it would also be a great way to show just how strong the Straw Hats have gotten overall. The last and by far and away most interesting option is that Enel will return as an ally for the Straw Hats. Now, I'm not saying that he's going to be the Straw Hats' best friend or anything, but he could prove to be a valuable ally in the final war. With a robot army and potentially awakened Devil Fruit, he would be one of the most powerful characters in the endgame. But why would he choose to align himself with the Straw Hats and the survivors of the world? He hates Emu. It seems highly likely that Enel wouldn't side with Emu earlier, and that he actually hates him for a couple specific reasons. One is that as a god, he is unlikely to view Emu or any of the celestial dragons as worthy, and honestly he might view Luffy as more worthy because at least he's beaten him before. But there's also the strong possibility that Enel will hate Emu and the dragons because our theory could be correct. If the theory is correct and Enel is a Lunarian, then it makes logical sense for him to hate the dragons for 2 reasons. One is that they would have been responsible for the destruction of all his people and they're fleeing into the unknown corners of the world. This would also make them indirectly responsible for what had happened to Enel, and he would probably still hold a grudge over that, particularly the loss of his wings. The other strong reason that he would dislike them is that as Lunarian, they would largely be inferior to him, at least in his opinion. And we've already seen how Enel treats those below him that he deems unworthy. So whether this leads to him fighting the world government on his own or teaming up with others remains a strong contender. Of course, even if the theory is wrong, this will more than likely still be the case for him in the future. I can't picture Enel looking at the celestial dragons as anything other than fat, lazy, slow-witted lower beings, holding their power over people that only people like him should have. But what does that mean for his future in the series? Now, I know that Enel's whole future is speculation at this point, much like any other character in One Piece, but there really is a likely outcome to me that he will forego, and that is the fact that Enel will most likely perish during the final saga. This is because it makes a lot of sense for Enel to be the benchmark for how strong somebody is, whether that is the Straw Hats or more likely Emu. Plus, Enel can go away without upsetting too many fans, because if you did this with a character like Crocodile or Dragon or Shanks, it would be deeply upsetting for many of them. And there is another potential effect that this would have, and that would be that his fruit could now be released into the One Piece world. Any number of characters could eat it and gain this fruit's power, and it is a lot of power for them to have, but only one person could make full use of its invincibility that it provides. A person that even Oda himself said would have been unstoppable with it, with only Luffy being their co-equal. That person is Nami. Nami would have been an invincible weather woman had she been granted access to this fruit, and the only person that could stop her being Luffy, as confirmed by Oda himself. But the thing is that she already knows how the fruit works. She has seen it in action. She could already use a majority of its techniques, and not only this, but her advanced understanding of both weather and electricity at this point might even help her awaken the fruit. But even without an awakening, the technique of this fruit infused into Zeus or the climate attack would allow Nami weather manipulation on par with Big Mom. She might even be able to launch a Raigo-style island decimating attack. In other words, she could be on par with an Emperor of the Sea in terms of power. And wouldn't it be funny if that was Enel's final legacy? The woman he tried to take to the moon with him becomes the next Thunder God.